The air in the conservatory grew thick, and the rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to echo the frantic thumping in my chest. I hadn't even fully turned before my mother-in-law, Margaret, her face a mask of cold fury, snatched the heavy copper watering can from the plant stand. With a guttural cry, she flung its icy contents directly at me. The frigid shock stole my breath, soaking through my dress and chilling me to the bone. I stumbled, hands instinctively cradling my 7-month bump, gasping. But the horror that unfolded next was beyond any nightmare I could have conjured, a moment that would irrevocably alter the course of my life. Hello, I'm Sophia, and I'm 32 years old. For the last 6 years, I've been a freelance cartographer, specializing in historical maps for museums and private collectors, working from my home studio in the quaint, autumnal town of Oak Haven, nestled in the Vermont mountains. Charting forgotten trails and recreating ancient landscapes was my solace and my pride, a career built on precision and passion. My days were measured in ink lines and parchment, a quiet existence that, despite its intellectual rewards, left a certain chamber of my heart wanting. 4 years ago, I met Alistair. He was 35, a charismatic architect at a leading sustainable design firm, Terraform Design. He was thoughtful, witty, and possessed a gentle strength, the anchor I hadn't known I was seeking. After a courtship that felt as natural as the changing seasons, we married and settled into a sprawling, late 19th century farmhouse on the outskirts of Oak Haven, complete with a wraparound porch, original stained glass windows, and acres of whispering maple trees. It was our haven, the place we'd build our dreams. The first 2 years were idyllic. Alistair and I would spend evenings by the fire, sketching plans for our future, envisioning the laughter of children echoing through the wide wooden hallways. But dreams, I learned, can curdle into nightmares, and the home I'd lovingly restored was about to become a gilded cage of dread and quiet coercion. It was a blustery October evening, the scent of wood smoke heavy in the Oak Haven air. I'd just finished proofing a set of maps for the New England Historical Society when the phone chirped. Alistair's voice, usually so calm, was strained. "Sophia, darling, Mother's had a rather nasty fall," he said, a tremor of genuine fear in his tone. "Broke her hip. She needs full-time care, and, well, she's always been there for me, especially after Dad passed. I need to bring her here." My agreement was immediate. Of course, we would care for her. A week later, Alistair's mother, Margaret, arrived. She was not what I'd pictured from Alistair's affectionate anecdotes of a doting, slightly eccentric matriarch. I'd heard of her renowned rose gardens, her leadership in local heritage preservation societies, and the respect she commanded in her community of Concord. The woman who greeted me was dressed in perfectly tailored tweed, her silver hair coiffed impeccably, and she moved with the regal bearing of a woman accustomed to deference. But beneath the refined surface lay a will of granite and an unyielding need for dominion. Initially, her influence was subtle. Gentle suggestions about rearranging the antique furniture in the parlor to improve the flow, dear tips on preparing Alistair's favorite childhood dishes, a subtle critique of my choice of drapery. Within a fortnight, these suggestions had hardened into edicts. "Supper is to be served at precisely 7:30, Sophia," she announced one evening, observing me from the doorway of the kitchen, her voice soft but steely. Punctuality is a cornerstone of a well-ordered life. Tardiness invites chaos. She had pronouncements for everything: the precise way the table linens should be ironed, the brands of cleaning supplies deemed acceptable, even the proper method for pruning the climbing roses by the porch. I dismissed them as quirks, the understandable anxieties of an older woman adjusting to a new home. But day by day, they became invisible fetters, drawing tighter around my spirit. Alistair, consumed by a complex university library project, often worked late or traveled to Boston for consultations. When he called Margaret, she'd paint a serene portrait of domestic harmony. "Sophia is managing wonderfully, Alistair." A bit unconventional in her methods, perhaps, but I'm here to provide a steadying hand, she'd tell him, her voice dripping with maternal concern. You've no need to fret. To him, she remained the stoic, self-sacrificing mother who'd raised him alone after his father's early death. To me, she was an insidious presence, her expectations mounting relentlessly. She's a marvel, isn't she? Alistair would often say, and a fresh pang of isolation would pierce me. How could I tell him that the woman he idolized was methodically dismantling my peace? Margaret's reign over the farmhouse solidified. My days became a performance orchestrated to her exacting standards, cleaning, cooking, ensuring every minute detail of the household met her unspoken approval. I felt like a guest, then a servant, in the very home that was meant to be my sanctuary. This, however, was merely the overture to a far more sinister symphony. I discovered I was pregnant on a crisp December morning. Snow lay like a fresh quilt over Oakhaven, and the winter sun cast long, crystalline shadows through our bedroom window. Standing before the bathroom mirror, the positive test clutched in my trembling hand, tears of disbelief and overwhelming joy streamed down my face. After 2 years of quiet hoping and hushed consultations with specialists, our miracle was happening. When I told Alistair that evening, he swept me into his arms, his own eyes shining. He kissed my brow. We're going to have a baby, Soph. This is everything. His elation was a balm to my frayed nerves, and for the first time in months, I dared to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, things would improve. That fragile hope shattered quickly. I approached Margaret later, thinking this news would surely soften her. I have some wonderful news, I began, holding out the test. I'm pregnant. She regarded me for a long moment, her lips a thin, unyielding line. She set her porcelain teacup down with deliberate care. Well, Sophia, she said, a faint sigh escaping her. Don't imagine pregnancy is an excuse for idleness. When I was carrying Alistair, I managed this entire estate, tended a half-acre vegetable garden, and hosted the bishop for luncheon. Pregnancy is a condition, not an affliction. Her words were a physical blow. I stood rooted, the test still in my hand, as she continued her discourse on the fortitude of women of her generation. From that day, her demands escalated. She insisted I rise at 6 to prepare a full-cooked breakfast, followed by a rigorous schedule of house cleaning. The hardwood floors needed daily polishing, the silverware gleamed, and the conservatory plants required meticulous tending. Any sign of morning sickness or fatigue was met with a disdainful sniff. Indulgence is a weakness, Sophia, she'd remark coolly. I recall Mrs. Henderson from the parish, worked the farm right up until her waters broke in the dairy. I tried, desperately, to meet her expectations, but by my 5th month, the relentless pressure and physical exertion were taking their toll. I started experiencing worrying cramps and occasional spotting, sending jolts of terror through me. My obstetrician, Dr. Albright, sternly advised complete rest and an avoidance of any strenuous activity. Margaret, however, was unmoved. One afternoon, after I'd spent hours hand-washing delicate linens, the machine, she insisted, was too harsh. I collapsed onto the chaise lounge in the sunroom, my body trembling with exhaustion. Margaret entered, her expression glacial. Resting again, she inquired, her voice laced with disapproval. In my day, women didn't consult physicians for every little flutter. You simply need to develop more resilience. I attempted to explain Dr. Albright's orders, but she waved a dismissive hand. Doctors are prone to exaggeration. My cousin Beatrice ran a boarding house while carrying twins. It's about character, Sophia. You're simply not cultivating the proper inner strength. What unsettled me more than her callousness was the peculiar way she observed my burgeoning belly. A flicker in her eyes, a tightening around her mouth whenever she glanced at it, as if the new life within me was an affront. I couldn't dispel the chilling premonition that she resented this baby, though the reason remained an enigma. Then, one rainy afternoon, while sifting through forgotten items in the attic eaves, I unearthed a small, leather-bound diary. Tucked inside was a faded photograph of a young woman, heavily pregnant, standing by the very same ancient oak tree at the edge of our property. A faint inscription on the back read, "Eleanor, 7 months gone, 1988. Alistair had never mentioned an Eleanor. When I tentatively showed the photo and diary to Margaret, her reaction was swift and venomous. "Where did you find this?" she hissed, snatching them from my grasp. "Some things are private. You will forget you ever saw these." Mystified and deeply uneasy, I tried to dismiss the incident, but a sense of foreboding clung to me like the damp chill in the attic. My body was a vessel of anxiety, my mind a tempest of unanswered questions, and my resolve was eroding. The day it all came apart was unseasonably cold for early May, a leaden sky pressing down on Oakhaven. Alistair had flown to Chicago for a 3-day architectural conference. That morning, an undeniable sense of dread had settled over me. The persistent ache in my lower back had intensified, and when I used the restroom, I saw the telltale crimson spotting. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'd had fleeting symptoms before, but this felt alarmingly different. Around 3 p.m., the phone rang. My hand shook as I answered. It was Dr. Albright. "Sophia, you need to get to the hospital immediately," she said, her voice urgent and grave. "Your latest blood pressure readings are dangerously high, and we need to rule out placental abruption. The baby could be at risk." I hung up, my fingers numb. Every instinct screamed at me to flee the house, to reach the hospital. But as I entered the kitchen, Margaret was there, calmly arranging petit fours on a silver tray. The scent of Earl Grey tea and lemon biscuits filled the air, a grotesque counterpoint to my rising panic. "Margaret, I have to go to the hospital," I managed, my voice trembling. Dr. Albright said the baby might be in danger. She didn't spare me a glance from her task. "Nonsense, Sophia," she replied, her tone placid. "The ladies from the Heritage Society are arriving for tea at 4. You can't possibly leave now." "Please," I implored, my hand gripping the doorframe for support. The doctor said it was critical. Margaret ceased her arranging and slowly turned, her eyes like chips of ice. "Doctors are alarmists," she stated flatly. "In my time, we didn't run hysterically to the infirmary for every twinge. You will stay and see to our guests. It's what a capable woman does." My legs felt like water, but a desperate surge of defiance coursed through me. "I'm going," I said, my voice firmer than I expected, taking a step towards the back door. Suddenly, she slammed the silver tray onto the granite countertop, the clatter making me jump. Her face contorted into an expression I'd never witnessed, pure, unadulterated rage, a chilling madness, and something darker still. "You will go nowhere," she seethed. "Our guests take precedence." My heart pounded as I turned to escape. But before I could reach the handle, I heard her snarl, "You ungrateful, inadequate wretch." Then, the unthinkable. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her lunge for the heavy copper watering can, full from her earlier tending of the conservatory ferns. The afternoon light glinted off its polished surface for a horrifying instant before she swung it with surprising force. The icy water struck my face and chest, the shock of it knocking the air from my lungs. A scream tore from my throat as I reeled backward, clutching my belly. In the next instant, her hands were on me, shoving hard. I lost my footing on the polished flagstones and crashed heavily onto the unforgiving floor. The impact sent a blinding bolt of agony through me, and a terrifying, sharp pain radiated from my lower abdomen. My vision swam, and tears of pain and terror streamed down my face as I fought for breath. Margaret's voice, distorted and distant, echoed around me. "You are not fit to bear my son's legacy," she spat. "A woman of your breeding will only bring ruin." I tried to drag myself towards the door, but my limbs refused to obey. My mind spun, and the icy dampness seeping into my clothes made it hard to think. Just as darkness threatened to claim me, I heard a new voice, sharp with alarm. Sophia, are you all right? It was Mr. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, peering through the open kitchen window, his face a canvas of shock. Good heavens, Margaret, what's happened here? Before I could form a response, the wail of distant sirens sliced through the air. The flashing blue and red lights pulsed against the kitchen cabinets, and the last thing I registered before the blackness enveloped me was Margaret's face, a strange tableau of fury and chilling triumph. When I drifted back to consciousness, the world was a muted, hazy blur, as if I were viewing it through frosted glass. My eyelids fluttered, and I blinked against the stark, fluorescent glare of a hospital ceiling. The rhythmic beep of a monitor was a steady, unwelcome companion, and the sharp, clean scent of antiseptic filled my nostrils. Each breath was a labor, and a throbbing ache radiated from my head and back, a dull, persistent reminder of the fall. Panic clawed at me as I instinctively pressed a hand to my abdomen. The baby! My heart hammered as I tried to sit up, but my body was leaden, unresponsive. A nurse materialized at my side, her voice a gentle balm. Sophia, please lie still. You're safe now. My baby, I rasped, my voice a fragile thread. Is my baby? The nurse offered a small, reassuring smile. The baby's heart rate is stable, Sophia. But you've had a significant trauma. The next few days are crucial. We need to monitor you both very closely. A wave of immense relief washed over me, and tears, this time of gratitude, coursed down my cheeks as I offered a silent, fervent prayer. But that relief was cruelly ephemeral. As I dabbed at my eyes, my gaze snagged on the television mounted in the corner. The chirrun blazing across the bottom of the screen sent an icy dread through my veins. Breaking news: Margaret Ainsworth, prominent Concord socialite, arrested in Oak Haven domestic assault. The screen showed footage of Margaret, looking surprisingly composed, being escorted by police officers from our farmhouse. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair was slightly askew, her tweed jacket rumpled. But it was the expression on her face that sent a shiver down my spine, not a flicker of remorse, only an unnerving, almost serene self-possession. The news anchor's grave voice filled the room. Authorities have confirmed that Margaret Ainsworth is under investigation not only for the alleged assault on her daughter-in-law, Sophia Ainsworth, but also for potential links to the unsolved disappearance of Eleanor Vance, a former associate, who vanished from the Concord area 15 years ago. I stared, uncomprehending, as the words settled like stones in my stomach. Eleanor Vance. The name from the diary, the face in the photograph. The pregnant woman whose story had been buried in our attic. The door to my hospital room flew open, and Alistair burst in, his face ashen, his usually neat hair disheveled. He was a ghost of the composed man I'd married, his eyes bloodshot as if he hadn't slept in days. He dropped his briefcase with a thud and rushed to my bedside, his hands gently framing my bruised face. Sophia, he choked out, his voice raw. My God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I didn't see. I should have been here. Tears streamed freely down his face as he bent to kiss my forehead. Are you hurt badly? The baby? I nodded weakly, still reeling. We're stable. But Alistair, the police. I know, he interrupted, his voice cracking. He pulled the small, leather-bound diary from his pocket, Eleanor's diary. The police found this in Mother's locked secretaire, along with Eleanor's vintage locket, some old letters, and a one-way train ticket to California dated the week she disappeared. He could barely speak the words. She never just left, Sophia. Mother lied. She lied to everyone. Mr. Henderson, our neighbor, entered quietly, his kind eyes filled with concern, and stood beside Alistair. I've been uneasy about Margaret's visits for some time, Sophia, he said softly, his voice gruff with emotion. Heard raised voices now and then. When I saw what happened, I told the police everything I'd observed. They found recordings on her tablet too. She'd been secretly recording some of your conversations. Alistair sank onto the chair by the bed, his face buried in his hands. Why didn't I see it? Eleanor tried to tell me. She said Mother was possessive, controlling. I thought she was just being dramatic, but He couldn't finish. I reached out, my hand covering his, squeezing faintly. You couldn't have known the depths of it, I whispered. But now, we can stop her. Ensure she doesn't harm anyone else. Mr. Henderson nodded. The police believe they have a strong case now. Not just for this, but for Eleanor too. Her facade is finally crumbling. A maelstrom of emotions churned within me, relief, fury, profound sorrow, and a nascent resolve. Margaret had stolen so much, but she would not triumph. I would not let her. 3 months later, I stood in the Oakhaven County Courthouse, one hand resting protectively on my now significantly swollen belly. I was 8 months pregnant, and the baby's gentle nudges were a constant reminder of why I endured this. For justice, for the future. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, curious townspeople, and a few stoic faces from Concord. The air was thick with anticipation as we awaited the verdict. Alistair sat beside me, his hand enveloping mine, his jaw set. I could feel the tension thrumming through him. Mr. Henderson was on my other side, a quiet pillar of support. We barely breathed as Judge Peterson entered, his gaze sweeping the room. All rise, the bailiff intoned. The proceedings had been an agonizing blur, forensic evidence presented, witness testimonies replayed, Margaret's face, an unreadable mask of composure. As the prosecutor detailed her years of insidious manipulation, the calculated cruelty was laid bare, how she had subtly poisoned Alistair's perception of Eleanor, how she had driven Eleanor to the brink of fleeing, and how her actions had nearly cost me and my unborn child our lives. The most damning evidence came from Margaret's own tablet, audio recordings of her berating me, her voice dripping with contempt. A fragile creature like you is unworthy of the Ainsworth name, unfit to carry Alistair's child. I winced, the memory of that day a fresh wound. Mr. Henderson's hand found mine, a grounding touch. The judge inquired if the jury had reached a verdict. We have, Your Honor, the foreperson stated, rising. Judge Peterson nodded. On the charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment of an unborn child, and obstruction of justice in the disappearance of Eleanor Vance, this court finds the defendant, Margaret Ainsworth, guilty on all counts. The words resonated through the silent courtroom, each one a heavy tolling bell of justice. Margaret's expression flickered, her lips compressing almost imperceptibly. But she quickly schooled her features, remaining as poised as if attending a garden party. The judge's voice was grave as he delivered the sentence. The defendant is hereby sentenced to a term of 18 years in the Vermont State Correctional Facility, with parole eligibility considered after 12 years. A collective murmur swept the room. Alistair squeezed my hand, his own trembling. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. I glanced at Mr. Henderson, who gave a solemn nod. It was done. This chapter, at least. Margaret rose as the bailiff approached, her hands cuffed behind her. For the first time, she addressed the court directly. Her voice was chillingly calm, her words echoing in the stunned silence. I did what any devoted mother would. Everything was for my son. No remorse, no apology, only that same terrifying, twisted conviction. As she was led away, Alistair bowed his head. Why, Soph? Why did it have to be this? I laid my hand on his arm. It's not your fault, Alistair. She deceived everyone. But now we can begin to heal. The press scrum outside was chaotic, but Alistair faced them, his voice surprisingly steady. Domestic abuse, in any form, thrives in silence. We must listen. We must believe. And we must act. As we descended the courthouse steps, the late August sun felt warm on my face. The battle was won, but the journey of recovery was just beginning. Yet, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a fragile sense of peace settled within me. A month after the trial, Alastair and I sold the Oakhaven farmhouse and moved to a smaller, sun-filled cottage in the coastal village of Seabrook, Maine. It wasn't a grand estate, but it was ours. Bright, airy, with the scent of salt and pine drifting through the open windows. The neighborhood was quiet, families cycling past, neighbors offering friendly waves. The cottage had a rambling garden and large windows that bathed the rooms in soft, natural light. I loved its unpretentious charm. It held no shadows, no echoes of Margaret's oppressive presence. Here we could breathe. Mr. Henderson drove down to help us settle in, true to his word. As we unpacked boxes filled with books, maps, and household treasures, he called out from the spare bedroom, "Sophia. Alastair. Look at this." He was holding Eleanor's diary and the faded photograph. My chest tightened. The young woman in the image, so full of hope, oblivious to the darkness that awaited. A profound sorrow washed over me for the life she never lived. Alastair joined me, his gaze lingering on the photo. "Eleanor deserves to be remembered," I said softly. "We owe her that." He nodded, his eyes misty. "Let's put her picture on the mantel in the living room. She's part of our story. Always." I placed the diary carefully in a drawer and set the framed photo where we could see it. Eleanor's story had finally found its voice, and a measure of justice had been served. Her memory would endure, not as a specter of tragedy, but as a quiet testament to survival. That evening, we had a simple supper on our new porch: grilled fish, fresh corn, and a tomato salad. Mr. Henderson, a few new neighbors, and the young lawyer who'd been so kind during the trial joined us. Laughter mingled with the sound of the distant surf. For the first time in so long, I felt genuinely, deeply content. Alastair stood by the small charcoal grill, a relaxed smile gracing his features. He came over, placing a gentle hand on my belly. "He's quite active tonight," he murmured, a warmth in his eyes I hadn't seen for too long. I smiled. "He's ready to meet his dad." Mr. Henderson chuckled. "He'll be a strong one, that lad. Just like his mum." His words were a comforting embrace. We had navigated the storm, and now there was hope for our future, for our son, for a life unmarred by fear. As dusk painted the sky in hues of lavender and rose, I looked up and saw a lone seagull etching a path against the fading light. It felt like a benediction, a promise that even after the deepest darkness, light persists. On the morning of November 12th, a few days past my due date, I woke to a dull, insistent ache that quickly sharpened. I knew, instinctively, this was it. "Alastair," I whispered, shaking him gently. I think it's time." His eyes flew open, and he was out of bed in an instant, grabbing the pre-packed hospital bag. "Are you sure? Is it really happening?" I nodded, breathing through a contraction that stole my words. "Yes, we need to go." The drive to the small community hospital in Seabrook felt both like an instant and an eternity. Alastair gripped my hand, his voice a soothing murmur as I focused on the rhythm of my breath. By the time we arrived, the contractions were powerful and close, and the kind-faced midwife whisked me into a delivery suite. The scent of lavender from a diffuser and the soft lamplight were a welcome change from the sterile environments I'd come to associate with medical care. The hours that followed were a blur of intense effort, unwavering support from Alastair, and the calm guidance of the midwife. Just when I felt my strength utterly depleted, the midwife's voice cut through the haze. "One more gentle push, Sophia. He's almost here." I gathered every last reserve of energy, and with a final, shuddering breath, I felt an immense release, followed by the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, the strong, lusty cry of our son. "He's here, Sophia," the midwife announced, laying him on my chest. A perfect, healthy boy. I gazed at him, tears blurring my vision, a tidal wave of love so profound it left me breathless. His tiny fingers, impossibly perfect, curled around mine. His cries softened as I held him close, his skin warm against mine. In that moment, every trial, Every tear, every moment of fear, dissolved. Alistair leaned over, kissing my damp forehead, then tenderly touched the baby's cheek. "Welcome, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Hello, Daniel." Tears welled in my eyes as I repeated the name, Daniel Ainsworth. A name signifying strength, a new dawn, the precious future we had fought so fiercely to claim. Later that afternoon, as the pale November sun slanted through the hospital window, I watched Daniel sleep in my arms. His tiny chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, a miniature smile gracing his lips. Alistair sat beside me, his hand resting on my arm. "He's incredible," Alistair breathed. "You both are." I smiled, stroking Daniel's soft hair. "We're a family. And this time, we're unbreakable." Mr. Henderson arrived a few hours later, a small, hand-carved wooden bluebird in his hands. "For Daniel," he said, his eyes twinkling. "A little piece of Oakhaven's good wishes and a reminder of Eleanor's spirit. She loved bluebirds." I nodded, my heart full. She would always be woven into the fabric of our story. As the afternoon light mellowed, a profound sense of peace, one I hadn't known for years, settled over me. The fear, the pain, the suffocating control that had once defined my existence had receded. In their place bloomed love, resilience, and the quiet strength of a new chapter. I looked down at Daniel, who stirred, his tiny mouth working, before nestling deeper into my embrace. "You're going to grow up cherished and secure, my little warrior," I whispered. "And I will ensure you know the boundless depths of love and safety every single day." Alistair leaned in, kissing us both. "No more shadows," he said softly. "We have all the light we need, right here." Gazing out the window, the distant cry of gulls seemed to carry the promise of a brighter horizon. Our journey had been fraught with peril, but we had emerged, scarred yet stronger. And as I held Daniel, I knew this was not just an ending, but the most beautiful of beginnings.